Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and welcome to another Torah scripture study. We've got the last portion of Bereshit this morning. We've been reading the Torah for 12 weeks now, since we rolled the scroll back to Genesis. So we're going to wrap up the book of Bereshit, Genesis, today, and this is a really important portion. But before we get started, we'll open in prayer and maybe have a song or so here. Song or two here, and then we'll get into the readings. Okay, so Father, Almighty Father Yah, we just thank you for this another Shabbat morning together. I pray that we can rightly divide your word, and that you speak to us from your word. It's a living word, and we thank you for it, Father. We thank you for guiding our steps day by day, and that we can love your ways and love your teachings and obey them. And I pray that we in this path of learning more and growing more in the knowledge of your truth, that we also grow and increase our love for one another, because it says in your word that the love of many will wax cold. And so we just pray that our love for one another and for those that are lost will increase, that our burden for lost people will increase, Father, and that we will be light and salt around us. And so we just thank you for this time. We pray for anointing and blessing of each and every one that's reading here with us today, and for those that hear it online. And we just thank you and praise you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Okay, so if you have anybody have a song here?
Shabbat Shalom, Jesse. Nice to see you. Do you have a shofar, Jesse? Your mic's muted. May we never lose our wonder. May we never lose our wonder. Wide-eyed and mystified, may we be just like a child, staring at the beauty of our King. 'Cause you are beautiful in all your ways. King of kings, you are beautiful in all your ways. Ooh, 'cause you are beautiful in all your ways. Yes, you are. You are beautiful in all your ways. King of kings, you fascinate me. You fascinate us. You fascinate us. Who you are. You fascinate me. You fascinate us. You fascinate us with your love. 'Cause you are beautiful. You are glorious. You are beautiful. Yes, you are. You are beautiful. You are glorious. You are beautiful. King of kings. May we never lose our wonder. May we never lose our wonder.
Amen. Thank you, brother. Okay, so our Torah portion this morning is called Vayechi, and he lived. And it starts in Genesis chapter 47, verse 28, and goes through to the end of the book, chapter 50, those 26 verses there. So, and then we have a Haftorah in the book of First Kings, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And then we have some New Testament passages, Hebrews chapter 11, verses 21 and 22, First Peter chapter 1, 3 through 9, and First Peter chapter 2, 11 through 17. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and start off with chapter 47 there and 28, and you can just, whoever wants to start us out can just read that half there, and then we'll stop and discuss, and then go a chapter at a time from there, and try to stay on point, keep our responses and comments to around 2 minutes or less, so we can keep moving forward at a good pace for everyone, and that way we can all enjoy the rest of our Shabbat here, whatever we got going on today. But when you go to start reading, just let us know what version you have, so we can follow along in ours for reference. Please reference your version, whatever way we can. So who wants to start us out this morning on Genesis 47, verse 28, to the end of that chapter?
I'll start it, Chris.
I'll go ahead and start on that one. Okay, go ahead, brother. Thank you.
I'm reading from the JPS version. So Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. And when the time approached for Israel to die, he summoned his son Joseph to him. Do me the favor, place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. He replied, I will do as you have spoken. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. You want me to continue into 48 or?
Yeah, you can go ahead and do 48. Yeah.
Sometime afterward, Joseph was told, your father is ill. So he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob was told, your son Joseph has come to see you, Israel summoned up his strength and sat up on the bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, El Shaddai appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and he blessed me and said to me, I will make you fertile and numerous, making of you a community of peoples, and I will assign this land to your offspring to come for an everlasting possession. Now your 2 sons who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, no less than Reuben and Simeon. But prodigy born to you after them shall be yours. They shall be recorded instead of their brothers in their inheritance. I do this because when I was returning from Padan, Rachel died to my sorrow while I was journeying in the land of Canaan, when still some distance short of Ephrath, and I buried her on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem. Noticing Joseph's sons, Israel asked, who are these? Joseph said to his father, they are my sons whom God has given me here. Bring them up to me, he said, that I may bless them. Now Israel's eyes were dim with age. He could not see. So Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see you again, and here God has let me see your children as well. Joseph then removed them from his knees and bowed low with his face to the ground. Joseph took 2 of them, Ephraim at his right hand and Israel to Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand to Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, thus crossing his hands, although Manasseh was firstborn. And he blessed Joseph, saying, the God in whose ways my father Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd from my birth to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm, bless the lads. In them may my name be recalled, in the names of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. And may they be teeming multitudes upon the earth. When Joseph saw that his father was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head, he thought it was wrong, so he took hold of his father's hand to move from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Not so, said Joseph to his father, for the other is firstborn. Place your right hand on his head. But his father objected, saying, I know, my son, I know. He too shall become a great people, and he too shall be great. Yet his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall be plentiful enough for nations. So he blessed him that day, saying, By you shall Israel invoke blessings, saying, God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. Then he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, I'm about to die, but God will be with you and bring you back to the land of your fathers. And now I assign to you one portion more than to your brothers, which I wrested from the Amorites with my sword and bow.
Thank you, brother. Okay, so we see Yah continue to work in an exception to the norm here by having Ephraim, the younger brother, come before Manasseh. You know, the younger is exalted in a sense over the older brother. So the least, we see a picture of the least becoming the greatest again here. This pattern that Yah is showing us here. Something. Anybody have any comments or questions so far on what we read?
I've got a question as to verse 12, what your version says as opposed to what mine said.
Verse 12.
Max,
Mine
when you were
says,
reading in verse
so
17 and
Yosef,
18, sorry.
yeah, let me read 12 real quick. So Yosef brought them from between his knees, and he bowed down with his face to the earth.
Okay, that's how it should read. Mine says Joseph then removed them from his knees, and I've seen in different movies and depictions of this where you've got two like 10-year-old kids that are sitting on the knees of their grandfather being blessed, when in fact they were in their early to mid 20s. So yours is that verse that you read here, Chris, is more accurate than the one that I have.
Max, my verse 17 and 18,
Yeah.
18 says, Now when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. So he took hold of his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head. And is your version saying that Joseph thought that it was wrong?
Yeah,
I think I heard it. I think I heard you read that it recorded one of Joseph's thoughts in there.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Thought. Yeah, in 17, it says that he was placing his right hand on Ephraim's head. He thought it wrong, so he took hold of his father's hand to move it, and said, "Not so, my father."
Okay.
Okay.
All right. What version is that? The
JPS.
ESV?
No, the JPS.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Our version says it was evil in his eyes. And that's the ISR. The scripture says it was evil in his eyes. Yeah, we see that the firstborn of the spirit would be Ephraim, and we see that correlated here, just like similarly in the firstborn physically in Jacob and Esau, and so several places in the text we see that it's actually flip-flopped. It is not firstborn is not actually necessarily the physically firstborn. So, praise
Yeah,
God.
I just looked that up on the e-sword, and the word there, where mine says he thought it wrong, the word there is ra'ah, which is evil or wicked. So, good point.
Anybody else have anything to share on this? So I saw someone the other day using the word yachid. They were using the word yachid in the context of trying to say firstborn, like firstborn son, but in Hebrew it's bechor, and we see here that that word is used again in this chapter. Bechor is firstborn, but there's a birthright kind of associated with that bechor that can be bestowed on other sons. Basically, just like Tobiah, what you were saying, we see that pattern kind of again and again, and I think it kind of looks forward to how Yeshua is teaching us that the least will be the greatest, and that kind of thing. We need to, if we want to be great in the Father's eyes, we need to be least among each other, least to others. And Yeshua even demonstrates this by not only getting on bended knee and washing the feet of his students, but also giving his body over to be beaten and striped and crucified for us. So he did that, and he demonstrated that in the most magnificent way ever. But the word bechor, it's an interesting. We could probably do an interesting study on that, just on that word alone. The word yachid is only used in the Torah one time, and that is in Bereshit chapter 22, and it's referring specifically to Isaac. And yachid specifically means one and only, like your one and only son. And it's an interesting word that it uses for Isaac there, seeing as how Abraham had, it had Ishmael first. It was technically Ishmael was his bechor, but it wasn't Yah's will for Ishmael to be the bechor. And so Yah refers to Yitzchak in Bereshit chapter 22 as his Yahid, his one and only son. And I believe that's because it's a foreshadowing directly to Yeshua, being the only begotten son of Yah. So it's a whole nother study that we could do, but very interesting. Bechor versus Yahid.
Thank you, brother. I agree with everything you just said there, and I see that theme all throughout the text. And even in Deuteronomy, we see our Father saying that He did not choose these people above all the other peoples because they were the most numerous or because they were the greatest, but because they were the least of all peoples. That's Deuteronomy 7, verse 7. Deuteronomy 7:7. And we see that all over, like you said, even through the writings in the prophets, we see examples of that over and over and over. Saul was the least of his father's house, of the smallest of the tribe of Benjamin. Even so, just over and over, we see our Father choosing those who were the least.
I got something here, Chris. On let's see, it'd be 48 verse 15. You can directly link this to the faith chapter, Hebrews 11 21. This is reading out this is the King James version right here. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons, Joseph, and worshiped, leaning upon the top of his staff. So we see, how did they live? Because it says, the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has shepherded me throughout my life to this day. That you can correlate that word, belief as an action, type of an action word. Their faith, everything is by faith. Noah, by faith, Abraham, by faith, Isaac, all of it is by faith. Moses, because they walked according to righteousness seen in the eyes of Yudevave.
Now, along the same lines on verse 16, my version, I got to give you a different version. I got to break down by something else. My version says, the angel who has redeemed me from all harm. The word there actually means messenger. And I think this is a reference to when he wrestled with Yeshua, basically. When he wrestled with Yeshua. Because an angel, in and of itself, doesn't have the power to redeem us. Only Yah can do that. So I think the reference there is a direct reference to Yeshua.
All right, anybody else? All right, who wants to do 49 for it, please? Okay, I'll go ahead and do it.
I'll read 49.
All right, thank you, brother. Go ahead.
All right, 49 from the New King James Version. And I'll be doing my best to write the replacement of the name and such. And Jacob called his sons and said, gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, you shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He bows down, he lies down as a lion, and as a lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the people. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. He saw the rest was good, and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear a burden, and became a band of slaves. Dan shall judge his people. As one of the tribes of Israel, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backward. I have waited for your salvation, O Adonai. Maybe that's Yahweh. Gad, a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He gives goodly words. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him, but his bow remained in strength. And the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty Elohim of Yaakov. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, by the Elohim of your father, who will help you, and by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors. Up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills, they shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them. He blessed each one according to his own blessing. Then he charged them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, and the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave that is there were purchased from the sons of Het. And when Yaakov had finished commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last and was gathered to his people.
Thank you, brother. Okay, so does anybody see anything that stands out to them in these prophecies and blessings that Yaakov was speaking over his sons?
Well, verse 9, Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? And that's a question mark. So we can see this is Yeshua right here. If you go to who's going to be able to rouse up, Revelation 5, who's going to be able to open the seals? Because I'll just read from verse 3 here. And no one in the heaven or in the earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look at it. And I wept much because no one was found worthy to open and read the scroll or to look at it. And one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Yehudah, the root of David, overcame to open the scroll and to loosen its 7 seals. And the verse is, I saw a strong messenger proclaiming with a loud voice. So this wasn't Yeshua doing this. It was a loud voice. Who is worthy to open the scroll and loosen it? And then, of course, it goes down and others say, don't worry, there's someone who can open it.
Praise Yah. That's important. Thank you, brother. I got a question. Anybody? It's talking about Simon and Levi. It says, let my, be verse 6. Let my being not enter their council. Let my esteem not be united to their assembly, because they slew a man in their displeasure and lamed an ox in pleasure. Does anybody know what they're referring to there? What's being referred to with what acts Simon and Levi did that is talking about?
Isn't it the destruction of the rapists of their sister, Tobiah?
Is that
was my first guess while I was reading it.
Dinah and Shechem? Is that what I was wondering if that's what they was talking about, but I didn't know if everybody knew.
That would be my guess. Was that Simeon and Levi that did that? Because I remember it was only a couple of them.
Yeah, but it says further that they also lamed an ox or whatever, with pleasure. In other words, they did it just, I don't know, like messing around or whatever, just kind of cruelty to an animal. Seems like that's what that's referring to. I don't know if that happened. I don't know if that happened in the matter of what they did to Shechem, or if that was a separate incident. But he definitely calls him out, and he says he's not, his being that doesn't esteem their assembly. I mean, that's pretty strong words.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty strong. It's pretty strong words. And I wondered that. I thought that it was talking about the incident with Shechem and Dinah, and because I saw that that Jacob was displeased how they just went and took it upon themselves to go slay all the men of Shechem. He said he had what he said told him that they tainted his name amongst the people of the land, or something along those lines. And but that slaying an ox, I was wondering if that had to do with that same incident, or if there was a separate incident. Or but yeah, I appreciate your brother's input, because I'm trying to get a fuller understanding and make sure I see what acts took place that's really talking about here.
Well, we know that Yah told Noah, to not to eat the flesh of any being, or any animal with its life still in it. Now that can refer to the blood, of course, but it could also refer to them being alive still too. And so based on that, we know that Yah is, essentially is against cruelty toward animals. Now, it's one thing to make a slaughtering, when you're going to eat something or you're going to offer slaughtering to him, but to just be generally cruel or mistreat your animals. I mean, think about it. Our Father gave us the Shabbat, but he not only did he give us the Shabbat, but he gave it to the animals that are within our gates as well. So that shows you that, he's not okay with animal cruelty. If he gives animals a Shabbat rest within your gates, then um, we need to be respectful and treat our animals with love too. Because they are within our care, whatever's been entrusted to us. And so when these two sons who are the second and third born to Yaakov, who is a man of promise, a man who is the father of many nations, 12 tribes, and then many nations coming from him. This is not becoming of some of his older sons. I mean, especially the older sons. It shouldn't be happening with any of his sons. But the matter with Shechem, we talked about this before when we read that in the Torah portions. But this culture that we're reading about, this culture that we all come from, they were very focused. They were very they had a high emphasis put on honor and shame. Honor and shame was a big deal. And so for them to essentially cut a covenant with the men of Shechem, in the circumcision of their flesh, that they could be joined as one people. They made a verbal agreement. They agreed to this, and then those men of Shechem cut a covenant for it by being circumcised, and then they went and killed them all. And so we see that yes, it was a thing of dishonor for their sister to be taken against her will and assaulted like that. That was definitely a thing of dishonor. But they dishonored their father even more by offering shalom, offering terms of shalom and peace, and to become one with these people, and then turning around and killing them after they had circumcised themselves. So by them being circumcised, even if they wanted to acquire, even if there was a little bit of a selfishness to it, that they wanted to be able to see their livestock and their belongings as part of theirs, but they still did it. They still moved forward with the framework of that agreement in mind, and then they were killed for it. So this brought a lot of shame onto Yaakov and his name, his Shem, his character, his reputation. And so yeah, we definitely are seeing the results of this here in his final words to these two sons. And I think it seems to me the only reason why Levi or Levi was elevated to the status of being priests was because they stepped, they stepped up and slew some of the ones that were instigating the matter of the golden calf at the foot of Mount Sinai. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. I don't want to get too far off on the subject, but we are talking about his 12 sons here. So Anybody else have anything on that or anything else in this chapter?
Yeah, to back up what Chris was saying there, I'm imagining if we were like part of this little group, and God and His knowledge isn't well known and spread all over the earth, and we're just this little group, and our job is to represent Him and bring the knowledge of Him to the nations. And then if something like this were to get spread around, and then we go and and we're representing Him, that would be a huge hurdle to overcome.
All right, anybody else? Anybody see Yeshua somewhere else in this chapter besides Yehuda?
Yeah, I just saw your chat there, Chris. If something happens there, I can take over for you.
I definitely see Yeshua through Issachar.
You see Yeshua through Judah. You see Yeshua definitely through Joseph.
All right. Well, there's a lot more in this chapter, and we could maybe study that out sometime. This along with what Moshe speaks over the 12 tribes later, before they enter the Promised Land. Maybe do a study on that sometime. The prophetic words spoken over the 12 sons and the 12 tribes, kind of in one study. It'd be very interesting. And also tie it in with like the references in Revelation and other places. So would somebody like to go on to chapter 54, please? Okay, I'll go ahead and do it from the ISR. And Yosef fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Yosef commanded his servants, the physicians, to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. And 40 days were completed for him, for so are completed the days of embalming. And the Mitzrites wept for him 70 days. And when the days of weeping for him were past, Yosef spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, See, I am dying. Bury me in my burial site, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. And now please let me go up and bury my father and return. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father as he made you swear. And Yosef went up to bury his father, and with him went up all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Mitzrayim, and all the house of Yosef and his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones and their flocks and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great company. And they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Yarden, and they lamented there with a great and very heavy lamentation, and he performed 7 days of mourning for his father. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, This is a grievous mourning for the Mitzrites. That is why its name was called Abel Mitzrayim, which is beyond the Yarden. And his sons did to him as he had commanded them, for his sons brought him to the land of Canaan, and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial site. And after he had buried his father, Yosef returned to Mitzrayim, he and his brothers and all who went up with him to bury his father. And when Yosef's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "What if Yosef hates us and pays us back all the evil which we did to him?" And they sent word to Yosef, saying, "Before your father died, he commanded, saying, 'This is what you are to say to Yosef. I beg you, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgression of the servants of the Elohim of your father.' And Yosef wept when they spoke to him. And his brothers also went and fell down before his face. And they said, 'See, we are your servants.' And Yosef said to them, 'Do not fear, for am I in the place of Elohim? And you intended evil against me, but Elohim intended it for good, in order to do it as it is this day, to keep a great many people alive. And now, do not fear, I provide for you and your little ones.' So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. And Yosef dwelt in Mitzrayim, he and his father's household, and Yosef lived 110 years. And Yosef saw Ephraim's children to the third generation. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were also born on Yosef's knees. And Yosef said to his brothers, 'I am dying, but Elohim shall certainly visit you and bring you out of this land to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Yaakov.' And Yosef made the children of Israel swear, saying, 'Elohim shall certainly visit you, and you shall bring up my bones from here.' And Yosef died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Mitzrayim." And that concludes the book of Bereshit. We've been reading the Torah for 12 weeks now. Praise Yah. And anybody have any comments or thoughts on that last chapter there?
I've got something not on the last chapter, but it was kind of bothering me here a little bit from the chapter before, in reference to what Tobiah was asking with verse 6 regarding Simeon and Levi. My version here says, "For when angry they slay men, and when pleased they maim oxen." And we were trying to figure out where in Scripture there was a reference to the maiming oxen. And I went over to eSword and I looked up the same thing under the King James. And the King James says, "Oh, my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. Mine honor be not thou united, for in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall." And I got to look up these words, and oxen, what we're looking at for oxen, there's several different Hebrew words for it. None of them are what is translated as oxen, but there's one it's a little, I'll take that back. One word for oxen is shore, with the O as a vowel, and the word that we're looking at here for wall is shur, the same consonants but a different vowel. And the word being used in the Hebrew there is the word for wall. And the word for dig down, akar, means to pluck up, hamstring, or to exterminate and dig down. And I'm wondering, my question is, if anybody knows, I'm wondering if the reference there is not so much of hamstringing oxen, because if you go back to this incident back in Genesis 34, verse 27, it says well, I'll start with 26. They put Hamor and his son Shechem to the sword, took Dinah out of Shechem's house, and went away. the other sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the town because of their sister had been defiled. They seized their flocks and herds and asses and all that was inside the town and the wealth and all the children and wives. So they took it all as booty. I can't imagine that they would hamstring oxen when it's of such value. That's all part of the booty of the town, but they did plunder the town, which I'm wondering if that is a reference to tearing down walls. If anybody knows, I don't know.
I can see that, Max. Thank you so much. Yeah, because the word right before that, akar, where it says they did their own will, they did their own self-will, that's ratzon. And Brother Chris, you recognized that word recently. We ran across that in ratzon, doing your own will. So they did their own will by plundering. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it makes sense that in their wrath and their anger they slaughtered, and in their celebration they plundered.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Thank you very much. Yeah, that makes sense. I was wondering where that was, what was referring to there, but I hadn't figured it out. So.
I think the key word there is ikeru, or it's the root word that is akar, and it can mean to pluck up or root up, and or to cut or hamstring. It says. So I can see where they would get either way. I can see either case of that here. And then the word shore, ox, bull, a head of cattle, for plowing for food as sacrifice. And then we got, that's Strong's H7794, and then H7791 is shur, which means wall. So this is a very similar word here. It's the same letters. Let's see, that's a Sheen, Vav, Resh, and H7791. And then the one in this chapter is the same letters, but it's called it's H7794, but it's a Sheen, Vav, Resh in here too. Interesting. Thanks for pointing that out, Brother Max. I'm reading that further.
In verse 15, I'm seeing that maybe possibly Joseph's brothers have not yet really fully given obedience to the father yet. It seems that they know of his existence, and maybe at some point in their life, like maybe for a day or a week or a month or so, maybe we're obedient to him, but it doesn't seem like they're walking in perpetual obedience like is expected of us. And also through this conversation, Joseph also gets to see kind of what it's like to be God, because a lot of people will ask God to forgive them of their sins, but they won't take the steps necessary to really be fully not just covered, but completely washed clean. So then it's like a sin that he could have already forgiven them for. He's just hearing them asking the same question over and over again, and just like doing lip service, but not actually allowing their hearts to be changed. It says when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him." And if they had been walking in perpetual obedience, they would know that Joseph wouldn't act that way. And because they think that Joseph would act that way, it shows maybe how they would act if they were in that situation. 16 says, "So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, 'Before your father died, he commanded, saying, Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin. They did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of Elohim of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, 'Behold, we are your servants.'"
Does anybody see a little bit of the kind of a pointing almost to the Christian church today and what what he just read. So they sent a message to Joseph: before his death, your father left this instruction. Forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers. Referencing Yeshua before his death, he preaches and preaches and preaches, but churchianity did it today, changes what he says to suit their own needs. I don't know. That just hit me as I was reading that. I could be out in left field, but it kind of looks that way to me.
Yeah, they did kind of spin that a little bit, right? Maybe, I mean, not in a huge way, but they kind of add a little bit to it, didn't they? To soften that, a softer approach, if you will, whatever. What I'm reminded of by that, though, too, is that this picture of being able to forgive each other, and maybe these would be good references for the Brit passages as well. But we have like Luke chapter 17, verse 3 and 4, and let me pull this up here. It says, Luke 17, verse 3 and 4 says, take heed to yourselves. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. And if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day comes back to you saying, I repent, you shall forgive him. I see this here. His brother's coming to him, basically asking for forgiveness. Maybe they did add a little bit to it, but they're asking for forgiveness. And when somebody asks us for forgiveness, when they repent, when they come seeking reconciliation, we need to be willing to forgive them, and remember that Yeshua forgave and asked for forgiveness for the people, even when they didn't ask for forgiveness. He said to his father, while he was laid bare before the world, he said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I don't know. I just see that. I see a picture of that here, where the brother's coming to Yosef, and he does have forgiveness toward them, and he says that what they had intended for evil, Yah used for good.
And I think part of it too is the fact that sometimes, while we can forgive somebody else, we oftentimes have a hard time forgiving ourselves for what we've done, and realizing that it has been forgiven, letting it go.
Brother John, did you have something earlier? I'm sorry if we missed you.
It wasn't important. All I was going to say is that in chapter 50, verse 23, where it says born on Joseph's knee, is basically it's still a Jewish practice today, where they is basically kind of like how we do a lot of people in the regular church to have like they call it godparents, like a godparent or whatever, right? Well, this is basically the same thing as like the Jewish custom of having godparents, is where they put the baby during its brisk during circumcision, right? They put the baby on the godparent's knee as a token. There's usually I think 3 to 4 people during a brisk, and the one who's knee they're on, that's the godparent, basically. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, brother. Yeah. Brother Richard?
2 things. One thing starts at the beginning of the chapter. And Joseph commanded servants, the physicians, to embalm his father, and the physicians embalmed Israel. And how today embalming is done by mortuists. When you die, they take your blood out, and that embalming, the way they embalmed them then, is with aloe and spices. In verse John 19, 39. And Nicodemus, who at first came to Yeshua by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds. Then they took the body of Yeshua and bound it in linen wrappings with spices, and was the habit of the Yehudim for burial. That was for burial. And then this was sort of a question. I don't know if anyone can see a correlation between Job and verse 10:50 says, and they came to the threshing floor at Atad, which is beyond Jordan, and when they mourned a great and very sore lamentation, and he made a mourning for his father for 7 days. And I know this isn't a death or a burial, but Job in chapter 2, verse 13, then they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that the pain was very great.
Yeah, praise Yah, brother. That word physicians, that's a Hebrew word rapha, and it just means healer. And like you're saying too, it's really interesting because today those who we would consider to be embalmers or whatever, they are definitely not healers. They certainly do not perform any healing in any light or in any fraction of the light. But yeah, this word is rapha, and it's referring to a healer. The first place in the scripture where it's actually used is in Genesis 20:17, where Abraham prayed to the Most High, and the Most High Rapha Abimelech and his wife. And so this is like the second reference in this verse 50 or chapter 50 where it comes up with the word Rapha, but it translates to us as physicians. And the next place it's going to come up in the text from the Genesis 50 location where we have it now, Rapha, where they're giving it to us as physicians, they're going to go back and translate it to us as healing again in Exodus 15, where he says, I will put none of the diseases upon you, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Most High, that Rapha you, that heals you. So the word is really healer. They like to present it to us as physician, but I guess you could say it means the same thing. But and then the word for embalming, according to the Strong's, actually has to do with what you were just talking about, my brother, where what you just read about in Messiah, where they wrapped him in spices and such. What the word is here, it's the word is cornet, or to it has to do with spices or it has to do with spices, wrapping in spices and such. So.
All right, great comments on so far. Anybody else have anything on this or chapter 50 or the other chapters you read so far? All right, we'll go ahead and go to the Haftarah right here. We have a passage, 12 verses here from 1 Kings chapter 2, starting verse 1 to 12. Somebody want to read that hasn't read yet? 1 Kings
I'll read
chapter
that.
2. Okay, thank you, brother.
Okay, 1 Kings chapter 2 in the New American Standard Version. As David's time to die drew near, he charged Solomon his son, saying, I am going the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and show yourself a man, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, his commandments, and his ordinances, and his testimonies, according to what is written in the law of Moses, that you may succeed in all that you do and wherever you turn. So the Lord may carry out his promise which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons are careful on their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul. You shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. Now you also know what Job, the son of Zeruiah, I might have pronounced that one wrong, did to me, what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, to Abner, the son of Ner, and to Amasa, the son of Jether, whom he killed. And he also shed the blood of war in peace, and he put the blood of war on his belt about his waist, and on his sandals on his feet. So act accordingly to wisdom, and do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. But show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be among those who eat at your table, for they assisted me when I fled from Absalom, your brother. And behold, there is with you Shimei, the son of Gera, the Benjamite of Bahurim. Now it was he who cursed me with a violent curse on the day I went to Mahanaim. But when he came down to me at the Jordan, I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, and you will know what you ought to do to him, and you will bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. Then David slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. And Solomon sat on the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was firmly established.
Thank you, brother. I'm sure everybody can see the connection between this Torah passage and the Torah passages we read. But does anybody have any thoughts or anything on this? Anything noteworthy standing? So clearly, we have a similar situation happening here, where just as Yaakov was on his deathbed and gave instructions and blessings to his sons, we see David doing the same thing with his son Shlomo before he passes, and giving him some instructions on what to do, and basically giving him charge, giving him the reign of the kingdom. I know that Tobiah often points out whenever we see the word mishpat, which is right ruling or judgments. We have the book that we know as Judges. The Hebrew word for that is shoftim, which is related to mishpat, which is judgment or whatever. But in this chapter we just read, David lays on his son something extremely important that we see repeated again and again throughout the scriptures, and that is not just the right rulings, which are important also, but also he says to lalechet, to walk, vidrachav, in his ways, lishmor, to keep, hukotav, his statutes, mitzvotav, and his commandments, umishpatav, and his judgments or right rulings. And then lastly, ve edovatav, which is and his testimonies, kakatuv, as it is written. in the law of Moshe, the Torah Moshe. So, and katuv is related to the word we get for ketubah, which we get a picture of like a wedding contract or whatever, marriage covenant or marriage contract in writing. So it's a very interesting picture here of what he's reminding Shlomo is most important to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes, kukot or kukotav, and his commandments, mitzvotav, and his judgments, mishpatav, and his testimony, the edovatav. He's reiterating this. He's telling Shlomo to do this, and then we see sadly that Shlomo and all his wisdom, gifted to him by the Most High, and all of his glory, and all the riches that he amassed to himself, and then of course greatly multiplying wives to himself, many of which served other mighty ones, that it led to him coming away from the statutes, the ways, the statutes, the commandments, and the right rulings, judgments, and the testimonies of Yah. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on this before we move on to the New Testament? Okay, let's go on to these few passages from the Brit Hadasha, the New Testament here, and then we can have a time of prayer, and we'll lift brother Jesse up in prayer too at that time. Okay, guys. So we're going to go to these are kind of more shorter passages here, but if somebody wants to do Hebrews chapter 11, verses 21 and 22.
I'll read it, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 22.
This is the King James Version. It says, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith Joseph, when he died, made mention of the departing of the children of Israel, and gave commandment concerning his bones.
So there we have that passage that we talked about earlier about giving reverence on his staff, which some translations say on his bed or whatever. But any thoughts on that one before we go on to the next? Okay, we got a couple passages in 1 Peter as well. 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 9, and then chapter 2, verses 11 through 17. Well, somebody want to just read those two together there? 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 9, and then chapter 2, verses 11 through 17.
First Peter chapter 1, verses
3 through 9.
Blessed be Elohim and Abba of our Adonai, Yeshua Mashiach, who according to his abundant mercy has begotten us again to a living hope through the resurrection of Yeshua Mashiach from the dead, to an inheritance incorruptible and undefiled that does not fade away, reserved in heaven for you, who are kept by the power of Elohim through faith for salvation, ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold, that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Yeshua Mashiach, whom having not seen you love, Though now you do not see him, yet believing, you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Just 3 through 9, right?
Yeah, I think he wanted to read. Go ahead and read both of them.
Yeah, you want to go and read
What's
chapter
the
2
other one?
also? Chapter 1 Peter chapter 2 verses 11 through 17 there.
Got it. Okay. Beloved, I beg you, as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts, which are war against the soul, having your conduct honorable among the Gentiles, that when they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they observe, glorify Elohim in the day of visitation. Therefore, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for Adonai's sake, whether to the king as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of those who do good. For this is the will of Elohim, that by doing good you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using your liberty as a cloak for vice, but as servants of Elohim. Honor all people. Love the brotherhood. Fear Elohim. Honor Hamelech.
Thank you, brother. All right. Anybody have any comments or thoughts on these passages here from the Brit?
I do. So,
Go ahead, brother.
1 Peter 1, verse 7. Well, 6 and 7. For a little while, if you have been grieved by manifold trials, in order that the proving of your belief, much more precious than gold that perishes, and proven by fire, might be found to result in praise and respect and esteem in the revelation of Yeshua Messiah. I believe our brother read there, it said, what's your version say in verse 7 there, brother, that you read from? 1 Peter
That the
1.
genuineness of your faith being made, that the genuineness of your faith being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Yeshua Mashiach.
Right on. So the genuineness of your faith, here it says the proving of your belief. And I see that being, back into like in James where it says belief without works is dead. As in Shaul saying that when we take action based on what we believe and know, what we put our trust in, and the expectation that we have within us, that this perfects perfects us. It brings into fruition that we acted on our belief. And I see that here in verse 7 where it says the proving of our belief, and it goes on to talk about being proven by fire, that we're going through. Right before that it says we go through trials to see, we could know, but if we don't do and act according to based on what we know, or we fear man instead of the Most High, our works could be contrary to what we believe. We wouldn't be Shema, taking heed and obeying, hearing and obeying. But I see that here in the text verses that the brother just read from. Also in chapter 2, same. Similarly, that the way is narrow and hard pressed, and it's not what the masses are going to choose. The easy, wide way, and we're going to go through trials. So, praise Yah. May our brothers and sisters be strengthened today. The trials that we're currently going through, and those that are yet to come before us, because it's a serious day that we're in today.
I'm gonna read this last passage in 1 Peter chapter 2 again, and this the one I have too. But as I'm reading this, I'm seeing Yosef in Mitzrayim, kind of in these passages as well here. Beloved ones, I appeal to you as sojourners and pilgrims to abstain from fleshly lusts which battle against the being. And we saw Yosef do that, right? When he abstained from the seduction of Potiphar's wife, right? And having your behavior among the nations good, so that when they speak against you as evildoers, and they put him in prison because he was falsely accused, let them by observing your good works esteem Elohim in a day of visitation. Be subject to every institution of man because of the master, whether to the sovereign as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of doers of evil and a praise for those who do good. We hear a lot of this talk, like, we're not subject to the governments of this world or whatever, but we are, in a sense we are. We don't want to break Torah, we don't want to break commandments, and so when they instruct us to do something that's contrary to Yah, then we need to stand, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that they wouldn't bend the knee to the idol, and so they were put in the furnace for it, and they were willing to go in that furnace for it. They were willing to go in the fire for it. So I'm not saying that we do everything that they tell us or whatever, but we are subject to where we live, and we don't like that. No one likes having a yoke on their neck, but there's a picture, there's something in that we can learn. We can glean from that, and learn to have a more humble heart, because these are all, everything we go through in this life is all, it's like training wheels, right? This is teaching us really how to serve Elohim, how to love him with all of our heart, soul, might, and how to love each other, love our neighbors ourselves. Okay, so it says, be subject to every institution of man because of the master, whether to the sovereign as supreme, or to governors as to those who are sent by him for the punishment of doers of evil and a praise for those who do good. Now, some might see that verse and say, okay, how does he send worldly governors and rulers and governments to do the punishment of evildoers? Well, look, just about every time his people go off the path egregiously, he sends famine, he sends the sword. What is the sword? The sword is enemy nations, and he definitely uses enemy nations as a corrective, punitive measure against his people when they err, when they go off the path, when they fail to follow his ways and his statutes and his commandments and his right ruling judgments and his testimonies, you see. So he uses that as a corrective measure, and if he can do that in the physical, then what makes you think he can't do that in the spiritual as well, by allowing people to be given over to unclean spirits for the tormenting of their flesh and their mind, so that they would humble themselves and become broken and turn back to him. All these things are collective measures. And then verse 15, because such is the desire of Elohim, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free, yet not using your freedom as a cloak for evil, but as servants of Elohim. Wow. So as free, but yet not using your freedom as a cloak for evil, but servants of Elohim. So even though we're free, we're servants of the Most High, right? We have a servant's heart, the heart of a servant toward the Most High, Elohim. Respect all, love the brotherhood, fear Elohim, respect the sovereign. Anybody else have anything on that before we close?
Yeah, so if you read right on in verse 18, servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and the gentle, but also to the crooked ones. For this is favor, if because of conscience towards the Most High, that anyone bears up under grief, suffering unrighteously. For what credit is there in enduring a beating when you transgress? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure, this finds favor with the Most High. For to this you have been called, because Messiah also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow, who committed no transgression, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who being reviled did not revile in return, who suffering did not threaten, but he committed himself to him who judges righteously. Now, I want to go and make mention of Abigail and Nabal. because this word subject to and the word submit, truly the men in Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, who couldn't even use their own names in captivity because they esteemed our Father and were given pagan names, truly they did not submit to bow themselves before those idols. Many times over we see that. Abigail did not submit to do the will of Nabal in the manner of repaying David evil for good, but she was subject to him. To be subject to is different than to submit to. And a lot of errors that we have in our understanding of the word today is because we haven't kodesh or set apart or separated things. We have things that are in the same box that don't belong. It's like going to the store to buy clean, pure distilled water and you get urine in your water in the same box. Every time you go, you think they belong together, but they don't. We have to make a distinction between things. We're putting things in the same box. Submit and be subject to are different. And sometimes they're used in error by translators who are not anointed men, who were never called to keep the Sabbath, who were not called to turn back to our Father's Torah. We've got many translators that have translated our Father's Word to us that don't have that understanding, and they translate it in error and ignorance without even knowing. Submitting to, obey, is not the same thing as being subject to. Abigail gave an example of that because she went before her husband herself. She didn't ask her servants to hide from Nabal what she had done because she disobeyed. She did not do, yeah, granted, it doesn't say that he went and instructed her directly not to go help David, but her servants informed her that her husband had chosen not to help David, not to give David any help or to provide his men any food. And knowing that repaying evil for good, evil shall not leave your house, as our Father says in the Torah, that in her love for our Father and her love for the men of her house and her love for her husband, she did not want to see that come about. So she submitted to obey our Father's instruction, disregarding what her husband's will was, actually not submitting to what his will was. But she was subject to, she went before him, not that night while he was drunk when she returned, but the next morning when he was sober. She subjected herself. To be subject to means you're going to put yourself into subjection. You may be subjected to some type of grievousness, to some oppression, to some discipline, to whatever it may be. In her case, in his case, he hardened his heart, hard as stone against her, when he heard that she went ahead and helped David and his men. Enough so that our Father took his life 10 days later. Who knows what she endured, verbally, physically, whatever, in his hardened heart of stone. That was enough for our Father to take his life. As it describes right here in 2 Peter, that she found favor because she suffered unrighteously on behalf of righteousness' sake, because she subjected herself, as it says, wives, be subject to your husband. So I would suggest to you to really consider the translation or look at the Greek or whatever the words that our brother read from in the New King James earlier, where it says submit to the authorities of the world, because there's a lot of instances that they don't submit, but they are subjected. They are subjected. They are subject to suffering on behalf of righteousness' sake, subject to being punished for not submitting to obey the instructions of the land. As the Torah says, do not follow after the laws of the people where I'm bringing you from, or the ways of the people where I'm taking you to, but follow after my instructions and my mitzvot and my laws and keep them. And I'm not saying everybody should go out there and be a rebel. I'm just saying, like our brother just said, focus on our Father's instructions and don't be so quick. You know, we have a pastoral FEMA, Federal Emergency Management group of 20-some thousand pastors across this country, that they're training in verses in Romans that say submit to the government, submit to the authority of the land, and they're presenting it in a way that says we should obey whatever they say. And they're going to ask us to obey the things that are contrary to our Father's instruction. But the word is not submit. It's be subject to. Be willing to suffer on behalf of righteousness' sake. Doesn't mean obey them. It means be willing to suffer for not obeying. That's what it means to be subject to. So these verses talk about that heavily. And I think it's important that we make a distinction between submitting to obey or being subject to something or subjected to or not obeying what they want, because the crunch time is here. And we're going to be pressured into, already by our families, those of our own households, we're being pressured to want to do things that our Father hates and is grieved to see his children partake in and do. So, these
Hey, thanks for sharing that, brother. Yeah, I want to mention one thing on that too, is that just like in Hebrew, some Hebrew words can have multiple meanings, and especially the context are used and all, and then in the same way, the words that we speak in this English language can have multiple meanings as well. And so I don't think that we necessarily need to not use the word submit, or that submit can't mean that, but it can also mean to be subject to, just like what you're saying. Some things are synonyms of each other, and but it would be good to study that out further as well. So let me go to Brother Richard. He has his hand up, and then we'll go to Tom.
Yeah, just something real quick. This goes back to 1 Peter 9, receiving the end of your faith, even the salvation of your souls. So that's pretty important. So in Romans 6, you could start up at 19, but I'm just going to read a couple here. For when you were servants of sin, you were free from righteousness. What fruit thereof, therefore, were you having then, over which you are now ashamed, for the end thereof is death. But now, having been set free from sin and having become servants of Elohim, you have your fruit resulting in set apartness, and the end, everlasting life. And 1 Peter 2:11, beloved ones, I appeal to you as sojourners and pilgrims, and to abstain from fleshly lusts, which battle against the being. So in Galatians, we know we have to walk by the Spirit, because we're walking by the flesh. They're against each other. Galatians says, and I say, I'll start at 15 here. And if you bite and devour one another, beware lest you consume by one another. And I say, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not accomplish the lust of the flesh. For the lust against the flesh, lust against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are opposed to each other, so that you do not do what you desire to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under Torah.
All right, Brother Tom.
How do you know I had something to say?
I don't know. Not sure. I thought
It says here in Hebrews, therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Yeshua, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us, through the veil that is his flesh. And having a high priest over the house of Elohim, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And skipping forward, it tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, for by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of Elohim, so that the things which are seen were not made of things which are visible. And in my Bible, just across from this verse that we're studying out, just on the other page, are these verses. They're literally, in my Bible here, they're literally kissing each other. It says, do not let your beauty be that outward adorning of arranging the hair, of wearing gold, or of putting on fine apparel, but let it be the hidden person of heart, with the incorruptible ornament of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of Elohim. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in Elohim also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Amen.
Okay. All right, Sister Deborah. Sister Jan, did you have something?
I think your mic's on mute, Jan.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you now.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Now your mic is off
Now
again.
we can't now.
I don't know. This isn't working.
It's working now.
Okay. We were talking about Jacob and moving the his bones and all that. So can I go back to that? Are you still there?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was just wondering about what do you call that? When they put the bones in incineration, what do you call that? The incinerator.
Cremation.
Cremation. So is that not biblical then?
Right, that's bad.
The only reference we have to that being done was to King Shaul and his sons' bodies after they had been desecrated by the enemy, the Philistines. But as a general practice, we don't really see that at all in the Torah or anywhere in the scriptures. But I will point out, I know Tobiah has a lot to share on this. I would ask, brother, if we could just save it for another time because it's a big topic, really, to be honest with you. But there are many people that have died by being burned in fire, and some of which there is nothing left but ashes, and those ashes are mixed with whatever building they were burned in or whatever. Just rest assured that Yah is capable of resurrecting anybody and everybody who's ever had his breath in their lungs. You know what I mean? He is, nothing is impossible for our Almighty Yah. His nature are clear.
Right. So
it says in Revelation.
But look how they
chapter
bury
20,
people today too.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, the sea will give up. The sea will give up its dead, and I mean so he has the power to resurrect.
Right.
Whether it's ashes that have been scattered into the water or in a fire or whatever, you know what I mean? He's got the power to do it. I would say that's probably not the best practice.
Okay. Yeah. So when people have their urns and things, is that like sacrilegious or what?
Yeah.
Against the Bible?
I wouldn't say it's sacrilegious, but I would. We're supposed to bury our dead. We see that. We see the picture of that in the scriptures. We're supposed to bury our dead, and oftentimes that doesn't happen when you have the ashes. So it's challenging. Again, we could get into this. We could kind of get into a lengthy talk about this, and there's actually something pertinent that Tobiah could share about what happened with his friend, Dennis. But it'd be best if we got into that another time.
Before Tobias shares that, I just want to say, Jim, when you have questions like that, that is like the pristine opportunity. It's like a road that has already been paved that leads that can lead to Yeshua if you'd like for it to. Whenever I have questions like that, what I do is I keep them in mind and I stay in prayer and I keep asking Yeshua. I don't just ask him once. If I really want an answer to something, I'll keep asking him until he answers that question. But yeah, when you have questions like that, that is the absolute best way to handle it, is to go to Yeshua and say, hey, this is the conclusion I'm drawing from this verse. Am I off base? And if I am off base, could you correct me? I mean,
Yeah, but the
nothing's
thing
going to
about
get you closer to nothing's going to get you closer to Yeshua than that's what he made this book for. He wants to be.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. I want to thank everybody for your participation, your comments, and questions and thoughts. And we're definitely going to have some really good studies during the midweek here. We're going to be doing one this Tuesday, this day known as Tuesday to the rest of the world. We're going to be doing one at 9 p.m. Eastern on marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So I invite you to join in on that in the Praise and Worship Room channel. And if you're able to come back later on this afternoon today at 1 p.m. Pacific time, I think that's like 4 p.m. Eastern, with Brother Jacob James and Eliyahu, and we're going to be doing a study today in this same channel here. So I just want to close out in prayer, and I want to say a prayer for Jesse as well. So Father, we thank you for this time that we had to study your word. I pray we can have just shalom today. And rest, Father. And I pray that for Brother Jesse, especially, who's going through some pain, where he's not being able to sleep, Father. We just pray that you minister healing in his body right now, that you will take whatever pain or inflammation is going on in his shoulder, whatever it's the cause of it, Father, that you'll give him comfort and relief from that so he can get some rest today and be healed and restored in Yeshua's name. I pray everyone has a blessed Shabbat for the remainder of this day and a good week to come. Father, let us find the opportunities you have for us to be light and salt among the nations where you've put us, wherever we are, where you put us, and we pray that we can be light and salt, just like Joseph was in the house of Potiphar and in the prison with the baker and the butler, and in the midst of Egypt, in the midst of Mitzrayim, that he was able to be an effective witness for you and your power. Let us be that way wherever you've placed us, in our places of work, business, school, education, or even at home. Wherever we're serving, Father, let us find those opportunities you have for us, and not flee from that calling that you've given us, Father. In Yeshua's name we pray. Hashem Yeshua. Amen.